Well, hello, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to today's webinar sponsored by DHL and brought to you by WebAttract. I'm Lori Dearman, Executive Webinar Producer with WebAttract, and in a few moments I'll be introducing our hosts for today's webinar, who will be sharing insights into how to increase profitability in a competitive e-commerce landscape, which has turned customer experience into the new battleground for growth. You're joined today by over 700 professionals across 64 countries representing a variety of industries and job functions. Now, regardless of your industry or your location, we're confident that you'll find today's webinar of value. Our experts, Business Insider reporter Rachel Premack and DHL Supply Chain Head of E-commerce Nabil Moulaouli, will discuss why even companies that have long recognized the importance of e-commerce struggle to implement integrated strategies. Also, they'll discuss best-in-class approaches for balancing e-commerce costs and services and the most realistic options for remaining competitive and increasing profitability over the next 5 years and beyond. So at this point in the program, without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor over to our moderator. Over to you, Rachel.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So before we really get into all of the important kind of questions that we're dealing with in e-commerce supply chain, let's turn it over to our audience for a quick poll on what they think are the key challenges that they're seeing in the e-commerce supply chain landscape. We've got a few options for you all to pick. So what e-commerce challenge is most critical for you? Number one, competing against new business models, technology, changing consumer expectations, speed of order fulfillment, or other. Just enter that into your question panel so we can see what you're thinking on that end. Nabil, what do you think will be the top choice from our audience?
Well, it's interesting because we've done just recently a survey, and in that survey we got a result that the main challenge actually was the consumer changing expectations from that survey that we did recently this year. I personally see technology being really the main challenge in regards to trying to change a operating model and technologies that are in many organizations legacy models into the new world and the new pace of change. So I think technology is really one of the key challenges, especially for Fortune 500s that are going through that transition towards this accelerating change.
Right. That definitely makes sense. All right, so let's see what you all think. See those results.
Yeah, let's see if we get a different perspective here from this audience.
Okay. Yep, Nabil, looks like you were right. Changing consumer expectations with 31%, technology, and then followed by competing against new business models and speed of order fulfillment. Although speed of order fulfillment, I guess, is kind of similar to changing consumer expectations.
It's one of the dimensions for sure.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's interesting. We got the same. We got the same first response that when we did that survey earlier this year.
So before we get into some of the larger questions we're going to address today, so we have changing consumer expectations as well as decreasing order fulfillment times. What are some of the other key ways that consumer expectations are changing beyond that one-day shipping, two-day shipping, same-day fulfillment?
Yeah, so I think the topic of speed is a topic that is talked about in multiple dimensions. The importance of speed is an obvious one. Now, the other dimension we are seeing becoming very critical is number two, and actually in some markets it's even more important than speed, is convenience. So convenience is a key topic. In certain markets, it is not about speed, it's about the number of options that you give to the consumers for them to maybe buy online, pick up in store, buy online, pick up in a pickup drop-off location like we have in Germany, for example, with our pack station. So the convenience is really the second aspect. I think the third and fourth aspect that we're seeing increasing is the number three is the personalization aspect that is also becoming more and more relevant and important. And the number four is the notion of control for consumers. So what it means is whenever you buy something, that ability to actually have that full visibility of the order and cancel, reroute, redirect, change it as you go, and giving that control to the consumer is something that we are seeing also being a trend that is increasing, and people are more and more demanding in regards to the amount of data that they have and the visibility that they have on what they are purchasing. Okay. So I think think that's also two additional dimension that we have to look at.
Right, right. I feel like returns are also a big part of that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's exactly the same, right? I mean, when we talk about returns, we are seeing the same trends going also for returns. And what are the options you're giving to your consumer for facilitating returns? So that's also a big topic because it's obviously a key part of the experience, and a bad return experience is actually very impactful also for future purchase. And if you look at stats, a bad return experience could impact, up to 60% of a customer coming back and purchasing from your website, platform, whatever it is.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so let's definitely get back into all of those questions later on. But before we definitely want to talk more about returns, because that's something, at least at Business Insider, our readers are constantly wanting to know more about. Obviously, also very expensive for retailers and shippers to maintain the return costs. But overall, what would you say are those key trends in e-commerce that are impacting supply chains?
Well, I think the key trends, if we look, actually it's probably the best week of the year to talk about key trends because we just had the Singles Day in China on Monday, and many people were debating is with the current situation, the geopolitical situation and trade wars and all this conversation, we would see actually the same type of increase in e-commerce. And actually Alibaba just went through the biggest e-commerce day ever, which is actually the biggest e-commerce day for the entire world. And so I think one thing that we see in terms of trend is that acceleration is actually not slowing really down. It's still having a very strong pace. And sometimes if you look at percentages, you can say, well, it's not going as fast in percentages, but when you look at absolute value, it is actually still accelerating in most of the markets across the globe. So that increasing trend of e-commerce penetrating multiple industry, penetrating new categories of product is a key topic. Nobody now, I mean, we have so many conversations with consumers and clients that are in the life science space, automotive space. So it is not anymore a retail conversation or consumer, it's really across all the industries. So that's one dimension. The other thing that we see is increasing is the rise of B2B e-commerce. And when you look at that, it is really the sleeping giant because we are seeing that being a key area of growth for many organizations. And if you look at the stats, actually, the volume of transaction in B2B is going to be the double of B2C by 2025. So we're talking about more or less $6 trillion globally of B2B business. Wow. And that's going to be also impacting a lot of business model on the way this is evolving. And I think the other dimension we just touched on that is a key trend is really that logistics is becoming a competitive advantage in many industries. So when you look at that, it is a key enabler of business in e-commerce when it was not maybe as relevant or that critical for many businesses before. Right. Now it's really becoming at the forefront on purchasing decisions, the way consumers are buying. So supply chains are actually becoming as important as marketing, as important as payment, and they're really becoming a key enabler for businesses to be successful.
Right. And it's kind of interesting you mentioned that because I feel like a lot of people are including in their marketing, in their communication to their customers that like, yes, we have same-day shipping, we have easy returns. So it's all kind of feeding into each other in sort of a flywheel effect.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about this. If you think about as a consumer, how many stories have you heard about an online purchase experience in the last 2 years? Probably many.
Last 2 days even.
Yeah, exactly. Last 2 days. And how many of them were related to the delivery experience? Most of them. Most of the stories are not about consumer choice. They're not about more competitive pricing. They are not about the easy purchase. They're about the logistic aspect. And that's really impressive. If you think about this, all the conversation now about that speed, about that experience that you get. So I think it's just becoming so relevant that everybody is using this as a marketing tool, and it's also pushing the bar every day higher and higher. So what we had in 2012 or 2013, 4 to 5 days transit time is now a next day service, and we've seen since the beginning of the year, Amazon, followed by Walmart, followed by Target, and now Best Buy just announced also so they will launch next day for a large part of their SKUs 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. So it's just keeping the pace, and in certain categories of product like groceries, it's obviously already on next 2 hours, next 30 minutes, next hour.
Right, right. And you mentioned B2B e-commerce. So we saw this year especially, UPS has been innovating so much with healthcare drone delivery. What are some other ways in which B2B e-commerce is becoming, obviously that's not exactly e-commerce, but the movement of medical goods and blood samples and organ samples and these sorts of things. But what are some other examples of B2B e-commerce? Where do you see it growing the most fast?
Yes, so I think when you think about B2B e-commerce, just think about if you are a large organization that is selling, let's say, coffee. You use today networks of distribution that are completely managed and that have been managed a certain way for maybe 30, 40 years on a static manner with distributors, maybe large retailers. Now, many of these brands start to see competition that is really coming to their space, and especially marketplaces that are starting to sell directly to restaurants, to conferences, to you name it, right? Wherever you would consume coffee, which is anywhere, in an office, a building, whatever it is. So this type of shift for that type of consumer product is a critical one. Why? Because we as consumers, when we live an experience in our B2C world, we would challenge why we cannot have that same experience in B2B. So why, if I'm a restaurant, why do I need to keep buying on a static manner, get fulfilled or replenished twice per week my coffee, and that have that inventory and that carrying inventory cost, if I can just get it next day and I put an automated replenishment system, or I just reorder as I'm consuming on a daily basis. So these expectations from B2C are coming to B2B, and for certain industries, it's going to be a game changer. If you think about the automotive space in aftermarket parts, today there is a model with dealers that's going to be also quite impacted as to how actually dealers will be able to buy parts from directly from the manufacturers, and these networks that are today very close with a certain amount of companies or distributors that are allowed to sell this type of products will expand and will open up to actually a very wide amount of buyers and smaller businesses. So I think that's in certain industries going to be a complete game changer. And in other to a lesser extent, I think a highly regulated industries like maybe in the medical space, we will see maybe more control and that pace will be a slower pace for change. But certain industries is already today something that is critical to address. And we see a lot of customers engagement and conversation. We're having a lot of discussions around that.
It's interesting that you would see B2B e-commerce in manufacturing. Like I can definitely see where that would be growing more quickly among food or retail or these other sorts of more consumer-facing industries. But it's interesting that manufacturing is another kind of space for B2B e-commerce that's really poised to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, think about it. I mean, you have models today going through distributors that really don't have a reason to be. They are based on previous models, but you could challenge the fact that you need really to have a certain intermediary today. So it is going to be a very relevant also in manufacturing. And we see actually multiple customers also going now directly from factory to consumers. So that notion also of personalized items from a factory going to the consumer door right away, it is not new at all. I mean, there are certain companies that have been doing personalized apparel or footwear for many years. But the scale of that business now and the importance of going fast from that manufacturing plant to a consumer, eventually giving you the impression that it's even coming from a distribution center that is close, is becoming critical.
Interesting. And then, so to go back to the B2C side, how overall would you say that customer expectations are evolving?
Well, I think consumer expectations are evolving in some of the dimensions we talked about a bit earlier, on that notion of speed, that notion of control, that notion of I want to be able to decide what I do. I think one thing that is not talked about a lot on customer expectation, which I think is very important, is consumers are becoming agnostic. You really buy where you are browsing or surfing at the end or on the apps where you are. So I think consumers are not, and that's a real change, and organizations really have to think about this deeply, because we hear so many conversations about this marketplace or this marketplace and so on, and how to compete But really, the consumers, they are buying where they are experiencing. And that experience today is maybe on Google, maybe on Amazon, it might be on Instagram, it might be on YouTube in the next months, and it might be in other platforms in the coming years with social commerce increasing. So I think the notion of agnostic consumer, buying online, returning in stores, going into a store, actually having the experience in store, but then just buying it there, but you don't really want to carry your bags after you were in a shopping mall or in a store and you're going to the cinema, you don't want to carry your bag. So even if you go to store, that notion of consumer which is agnostic of the sales channel and have a relationship with the brand or with a distributor or with a platform, I think is really key to look at. And we're in a world where it's not about one single channel. I think for companies, they have to think about what is their consumer expectations and actually where are they on social media. Is that the best way to reach out to them? Is it on search engines? Is it on other platforms? There's a huge trend coming up around gaming. It's already massive. Is that the right channel for certain brands to start to position themselves and sell online? Probably for many brands it is.
Right.
And we're starting to see some move from some companies also in that space. You have to be where the consumers are.
Right. So if it sounds like just because you got the consumer to buy from you one time, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a repeat customer. That today's consumer is always looking for the next deal, the next sort of trend. It's not like customer loyalty it sounds like it's almost kind of decreasing a little bit.
Yeah, so I think there are two different categories, and this is also something you really have to be having a very hard look at. There are brands that have really a very strong identity and connection to their consumers. The obvious one, the Nike, the Apple of the world. Consumers go and they look for that brand. They want to buy that brand. So they will go and if they cannot buy it on a certain platform, they will go on the website of the brand. They will go in the app of the brand, and they will find the product that they want. That's a category that is really unique and is really given to maybe between 100 and 200 brands. If you look across, and that also includes retailers, because certain retailers have very unique relationship with their consumers. Now, you have the other part of all the businesses which are more and more commoditized and that don't have that same relationships with their consumers. And for them, it's a completely different story. For them, you are losing actually that loyalty, because consumers, they go online and they look what is being advertised or what is becoming as a recommendation with reviews which are good, which is now one of the key criteria also for purchase. They'll go and, the best example is batteries, right? And I think the best example is the amount of private label you see created by platforms, because these are highly commoditized. And if you're a brand that doesn't have that strong identity, these are the ones that are going to be in real trouble.
Right.
To be thriving in this new consumer relationship.
Right. Interesting. And so now that brands are also having to pay so much attention to marketing and advertising and these new different channels, as well as obviously all the fulfillment challenges we discussed earlier, how do you maintain profitability when you have to do free shipping, free returns, all these sort of highly expensive supply chain innovations, but customers are expecting it for free?
Yeah. So first of all, I think free shipping and free return is a trend that is going to keep increasing. Actually, free shipping is now expected. If you look at consumer surveys, it's expected in mature market at 80% by consumers. So free shipping is expected. Now we are starting to see even free international returns. Alibaba announced a couple of months ago that they were going to pilot for 8 countries free international returns, which is really the level of investment which probably is the most complex to do. But I think the consumers are there, and that expectation is just going to rise as the e-commerce growth continue. Now, how do you manage to? There are actually ways to improve the consumer experience and increase the convenience and reducing your costs. A good example is the consolidations that are possible with using pickup and drop-off location. As we talked, in certain markets, it's a big it's really a preference for consumers to have that model. So why not focusing on that? I think the big mistake that I see a lot in many organizations is people look at the US territory and they say, well, we want to reach same day or next day in the entire US, as an example. Now, is the consumer in Manhattan the same than in the middle of the US, in a remote area, in terms of expectation? Probably not. There are certain consumers that have higher expectations of deliveries. So I think when you look at that, you really have to think about what is that expectation by geography, and we are seeing more and more focus around specific cities where that expectation is really high. So you have to look at it and not think about a complete territory, but think about geographical areas and really focus on that consumer where you have that type of expectations, and also that category of product where you have that type of expectations. Think about companies which are very large portfolio of brands. And we engage with them and they say, well, we want to go and we want to increase the speed of our fulfillment and our delivery to next day. And when you go into that conversation of, okay, but for what brand? They said for every brand. And when you go into the question as to why would you upgrade to the same level a premium brand where you have, baskets which are way higher to the same level than you have for one of your more popular brand? And oftentimes you don't get an answer for this. So I think that's the type of strategy that you really have to look at is what product, what consumers, and then start to fragment and think about it as pocket of consumer geographies rather than looking at it as a unified way, because it is not unified. Expectations are different by countries, by markets. Think about Europe. You have a landscape with multiple countries. We look at it as a geographical block, but in the UK and in Germany, you have expectations and services that are very different when it comes to what consumer wants.
Okay, and then we have one question that just came in. So, how do you see, especially when it comes to small packages and other sort of quick e-commerce parcels, where do you see the trend in placing those fulfillment centers closer to the main cities, closer to key urban areas? Because we're seeing more and more companies start to build these small fulfillment centers close to urban areas rather than these giant hubs, in more suburban or less dense areas. Do you see that trend continuing to build?
Yes, I think definitely we'll see that trend continuing to build. I think what is going to happen is we're going to start to see a conversion of assets in cities that will be converted towards, just think about parking lots. The amount of parking lots we have today, and probably in the coming years as we see more ride sharing, as we see more car sharing, as we see autonomous vehicles starting to come into place in cities, you're not going to need that same amount of parking spaces. So I think we're going to start to see some of these assets in cities that are going to be converted to be used actually for fulfillment operations. There are some companies that are working on different model micro-fulfillment. We are also looking into how do we get closer in terms of urban areas to be able to deliver that same-day experience, that couple of hours experience. So we have multiple initiatives in that space. I think the trend of becoming more strategically located is going to increase. Now, I don't think that that's going to replace the mega hubs. I think it's just going to become a complementary solution for a certain amount of SKUs that you will have that are either specialized product for that city or for that neighborhood that you want to get closer or you want to get faster, and they will be supported by a wider, a national DC or regional DC that will be fulfilling the larger amount of SKUs. I mean, when you look at large brands, they have 100 to 120,000 SKUs in average. So you're not going to put 100,000 SKUs into an urban DC. The long tail, it doesn't make sense. The real estate costs will not make the economic model work. But what could work is if you take your fastest mover for that area using data analytics and predictive analysis, and then start to think about what are you going to sell the most in that area? What are the products that are going to be very popular? And then position that inventory, which might be 5% of it, but that might represent 40% of the sales in that forward deploy inventory location.
Okay. And kind of similar along those lines, how do you manage this innovating within e-commerce fulfillment and addressing these new customer expectations without affecting your main brick and mortar fulfillment network?
Yeah, I think first of all, I mean, I'm sorry, but I think the question is already the problem. So it's not about affecting, right? I mean, if you know, we've been seeing many companies talking about an online and an offline strategy, about an e-commerce. If you have brick and mortar, you really want to look at how do you make that unified and harmonized with your online strategy. How do you leverage that? It is not really a question of should we or how. Is it, can I make it work, and how can I make it work to basically bundle the offering and leverage what I have? If you're not doing it yourself, someone will do it for you. So it's you know, we think also a lot of debate around, you know, especially the traditional retailers around how do you actually tackle, do you ship from store, do you, the answer is, at least in my perspective, there is no choice. You have to. Now, if you have a physical infrastructure, you actually have an advantage if you are able to leverage it the right way. And that's a complex thing because many people say, well, you know, you can just start to ship from store. Well, shipping from store, the fulfillment cost is 40% higher than when you fulfill from even from a local DC. Wow. And the reason is simple. A store employee will have a higher cost. The real estate is higher. The processing is higher. And the last mile delivery is not necessarily way lower also. So all the dimensions that we look at is really to have that holistic view and not thinking that, yeah. But I think for stores, you have to go through that. There is no choice. You just have to look at how can you make that experience better, leveraging. And there are companies that are doing it really well. You know, I think personally, I think Target, for example, is one of the companies that is doing a great job at this, or Best Buy also doing a pretty good job.
Okay. And when you do ship from store versus ship from a distribution center, what's usually the actual parcel carrier? Does that change at all, or you go with like a third party, or do you normally do something that's more? I guess I'm wondering how that fulfillment network works once you have the package out.
Yes, so I think today one of the key dimensions to make it successful also in terms of economic model is you have to use different model. And actually from our survey, we saw that many companies are planning to increase the amount of solution they use in fulfillment and in last mile. So I think it's very important to look at that as a dynamic model and add solutions, basically. So think about it. If you look at the past and you think about how many options were you using before, you had this national DC, and then you will have one or two carriers to do the shipping and to do the last mile. Now today, we have DCs where there is, you know, in outbound sorters, you have 200 carriers options, 200.
Yeah.
So the best carriers in certain countries might not be the best one in others. The best carriers in certain geographies might not be the best ones. What you want is you want a best-in-class logistic partners that can really help you to orchestrate that entire ecosystem. It's not only about who you use, how do you integrate, how do you monitor, how do you keep improving, how do you use innovative ways of deliveries, how do you integrate crowdsource solutions, how do you integrate new ways of deliveries and leveraging existing infrastructure that you might have with point of sales. So it's really, you know, it's really not a fulfillment plus last mile solution. It's really around how do you holistically look at the solution and build something that's going to deliver speed, quality, and options to the consumers.
Okay. And then what kind of technologies do you think are you seeing in the next 5 or 10 years that will be the most impactful in managing these costs and in meeting consumer expectations?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the wider perspective of all the technologies, you know, AI and 5G and so on, I think and drones, I think all of them will have an impact. Now, if we look in the shorter term, probably next 5 years, I think the two main ones will be robotic and automation solutions. And the other dimension will be the autonomous vehicles that will come into play. So if you think, for example, about robots and automation solutions, that we are putting in place today, if you look at the wider market, there is more or less 270,000 robots that were deployed last year, and that number is expected to be at 4 million by 2025. We see huge improvements actually with robots. We work with partners where we have double productivity level. We have partners where we've reduced also cycle time by 50%. So this type of robotic solutions alongside with our workforce, because we're investing a lot of effort and money into collaborative robots, assisted robots that are working in areas of the business where we see opportunities to improve cost. So I think that's one key dimension. The other dimension is autonomous vehicle, being self-driving cars or being delivery bots are coming. There are already huge scale pilots and proven technology that is in place, especially for the last mile. And one thing that's going to be very impactful is if you look, for example, at autonomous self-driving cars, you don't need to get to level 5, which is fully automated cars, to have a huge impact on logistics. Even with level 4, which is highly assisted, you will start to see decrease on last mile delivery around 20% based on most of the surveys. So, and the reason is very simple. There are certain areas where just helping the driver to go through, for example, through a residential street at a very low speed, that will increase significantly the time that it takes for them to go and doing, for example, the deliveries. But then when you think about level 5, which will have a huge impact really on how many tasks can the driver do and how do they interact with a vehicle that is fully autonomous, you're going to start to see decrease of cost at 40%. So I think that's going to be a game changer in how technology will really impact e-commerce cost and effectiveness and speed also. I mean, today you cannot deliver speed without automation. It's as simple as this. You just can't. You cannot get, when you think about some of our large clients that ship 100,000, 200,000 per day, orders or units, you cannot do this manually. Even if you put 4,000 people, you're not going to do it at the service level expected.
And one last point to touch on before we delve into more of these questions. What, I guess, how does e-commerce affect companies' approaches to insources versus outsourcing?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting trend also. Actually, we that was one of the questions we did in our survey, and we saw a trend coming next 3-5 years that there will be more outsourcing in the space of e-commerce. Now, for me, I think the major difference is, and we see this with a lot of customers and a lot of companies we engage with, if you're going to try to build the future based on your past and looking backward at what you have in terms of infrastructure, the likelihood that you're successful is very low. So you really have to rethink the models, especially in the retail space, because the models are built for, planned inventory allocations, distribution to stores, batch orders. So, a static, not a fully static, but a pretty static supply chain. Now, if you think about this in e-commerce, you can have a brand that is promoting something on social media, and suddenly you have a spike of a sneaker or a jean or a suit jacket, and you might have 20,000 orders in 2 hours. If someone famous promoted or put it, whatever it is. And then so you have to ship that 20,000 orders with the same service level than what people are expecting and what you have on your website, right? So I think that's going to be a key dimension on how the supply chain of e-commerce are evolving. The companies that are today looking at outsourcing, usually when we have this question a lot, what are the benefits? To me, there are 3 key dimensions. One is expertise. And if you look at a company like DHL, we've been doing e-commerce of large scale for more than 15 years, and we are working with multiple clients across the globe with different profiles, different industries. So there's a lot of learning and a lot of expertise there that is in place from all these implementations and running businesses for large organizations. So the expertise piece is a key one. Second one is technology. And thinking about today, fast pace of change, if you think you're going to develop the technology and all the technology you need on your own, you're probably also missing some areas of opportunities, because the technology are changing so fast that you have really best-in-class players in different steps of the of the process. So when we look at this, we look at ourselves as really like that orchestrator and plugging in and have that experience of what best technologies work for what type of profile. And we have also obviously all these integrations already in place. So when we have a customer that comes to us and say, what is the best in regards to technology, we have already benchmarks and we can make suggestions, without starting from scratch in the different dimensions of supply chain. So technology, I think, is a key piece. And the third piece is network, right? I mean, today, if you think about also previous models compared to now, and we talk about these urban centers, this DCs that needs to be closer to consumers. If you're on your own and you start to invest into all these sites, that's going to be a real challenge in terms of how fast can you go. And today, time is really, really critical. For companies that are not yet deep in e-commerce, and from our survey, 70% of the companies still said that they are working on the implementation roadmap. That's going to be a real problem. So a logistic company can really help you to speed up that process, leveraging their network of people, of facilities, and the just overall infrastructure of having experts across the globe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then let's see, we have one question. What would let's see, some technical difficulties. Let's see. So what would you say are some of the best regions or some of the best cities as a regional hub? What are their advantages? This person is asking specifically for the Asia Pacific region.
The best cities in terms of hubs for e-commerce?
Yes.
Okay.
And specifically Asia Pacific.
Yes. Well, I lived in China for 4 years, so maybe I can use that experience to talk about this. So in Asia, so first of all, in Asia, if you look at countries like China and Japan, I think particularly China, they are, and people don't like to hear this in the US, but they are ahead globally compared to the rest of the world. That's just a reality. And they are ahead on time to delivery. They are ahead in regards to models of transformation of retail. They're really ahead on payment, on most of the dimensions.
Just everything. You got just about
most of the dimensions. And there are good reasons for this. We're not going to enter into that. That's another discussion. But they're ahead. And when we think about this, you see very high level of concentration on the major urban centers, right? Shanghai. I mean, Shanghai, just as such, has a huge infrastructure to serve, and you cannot serve the city in a couple of hours if you don't have strategic locations within the city. So you cannot be in the outside because just traffic and so on will never get you into a same-day delivery process. So you have to have strategic locations, but really around the key cities. I mean, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore. We are seeing a lot of best-in-class model coming from these regional hubs, and I think it's not really that it's different than where all the major city centers are, but that's where you have the highest level of concentration, and that's where you have the best logistic hubs, and that's where you need to be if you're going to be able to serve consumers with the level of expectation that they have in that region.
Mm-hmm. So what cities would you say are the best for regional hubs then?
Well, I think for a regional hub, I think today probably Singapore is probably still the best, just from a tax perspective, from a free trade, from a strategic location in the center of Asia. You have a huge trend of also of growth of e-commerce in Southeast Asia, which obviously Singapore in that case have a strategic advantage because of the proximity and the connection to Southeast Asia with countries with huge population like Indonesia and so on. So I think Singapore probably would be the best for regional hubs. And we actually did some consulting projects with some brands also, and Singapore came back a couple of times as the best place.
Okay. And then one other question we have, technology is one of the most critical success factors in e-commerce according to the poll. And specifically in automation, how do you recommend the audience kind of focuses on physical automation and, for instance, goods to person, AS/RS? Like,
yes.
how do you figure out what to focus on?
Yeah. So what we see is a higher demand around flexible automation. So one of our partner, for example, is Locus Robotics. And they are really a solution where we've had great success, where we are seeing that type of technology being a game changer in multiple profile of businesses. And we have also great success stories around productivity improvement that have doubled, a reduction of cycle time with that specific technology. And we believe that in regards to companies and business model that are going to change still significantly, you want to invest the least amount of money in terms of fixed automation and look more at automation that you can actually easily redeploy. So solutions like Locus, for example, that is really a flexible model and that you can redeploy in terms of scope, in terms of size, through different models. I think it's a key part of how we look at this. The ability to redeploy, the ability to put into different profile of business, the versatility of the solution itself, I think is key.
Okay. And you sort of touched on this a bit with the outsourcing question, but we have one audience question kind of along the lines of, how do you ensure that you never have to drop orders?
Well, drop orders. So the biggest KPI for us in most of the e-commerce businesses is to make the full fulfillment of the orders that we got through that day by that evening. That's, and cutoffs change by profile or by consumers or by customers that we might have or we might do business with. But that's generally the most important factor of success is if you're going to get orders up to 8 p.m., I want all these orders fulfilled by the end of the day into a carrier network so my consumers can get them next day, second day, whatever. So for us, for example, key areas of work are about inventory accuracy, about making sure that we have the technology that are supporting us to make that fulfillment successful, to evaluate if we have any gaps in regards to where the inventory is located into the DC so that we can make sure we are not actually dropping orders. From a fulfillment standpoint, we really look at that as being the core of what we do. And we are using technologies, multiple technologies of the WMS and so on to make that a reality.
Okay. And we talked just a bit about Asia Pacific. We have one audience question about how do you see the evolution of e-commerce in Mexico?
Okay. Well, I don't know if the audience is helping me, but I lived in Mexico also before. So Mexico has still a low penetration in terms of business. So if you look at e-commerce penetration, it's around 6% in Mexico. Mexico is actually a very interesting market because it's a population of over 100 million people with also an important growing middle class. So I think Mexico is one of the next big markets for e-commerce when it comes to Latin America. And when you look at the leading marketplaces also in the region, Mexico and Brazil are really the two powerhouses of South America. And also in Mexico, you really have three main urban centers, so Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. And these are areas where we see actually multiple innovative companies coming from Mexico in regards to logistics also. And I think in Mexico, we are just starting that curve of growth. And, I was there two months ago, and my key message for the people I was with is you don't have a situation like in the US where you have a very dominant player or a couple of very dominant players like you have in China or like you have in the US. So it's a great opportunity because it's still, you have dominant players, but they are not 50% of the market or 50% of the growth of e-commerce. So it's a great opportunity. It's a great timing for companies to actually position themselves and really take advantage of that growth, because one thing that is clear is that curve of 6% of penetration is just going to go and it's going to keep increasing. There are some problems around banking and there are some challenges around infrastructure and so on, but this is getting fixed in the sense of people are coming with digital wallets, companies are coming with solutions to serve this type of challenges, and it's going to grow. It's going to grow and it's going to go significantly still ahead.
Okay. And we're over time by 1 minute, but if you could just say in one sentence, what is your number one piece of advice for all of the companies, all of the people watching this fireside chat?
Yeah.
In just one sentence, if you can do it.
In one sentence, don't try to get it right the first time. I think we are having so many conversations with very large organizations that are looked even at best-in-class companies in their space, and they're also trying to figure it out. It's an evolving model. You just have to work and keep improving it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Okay, and let's turn it back to Lori to hear what our next steps are.
Okay, well, as for next steps, please look for a follow-up email to be distributed in the coming days. And in that email, we'll include a registration link for the December 11th webinar, How to Delight E-commerce Customers with a Fast, Flexible Supply Chain, where you'll hear a case study from Mercado Libre. You'll be able to access additional resources related to e-commerce, as well information on how to set up a one-on-one discussion with a supply chain expert. If you did ask a question today and we did not get to it, please know that we will be responding to those questions over the next 7 days. Before we sign off for today, special thanks to Rachel Premack and Nabil Mulali, as well as to our organizer for today, DHL. We'd also like to thank each of you for joining us, and we hope to see you on the next webinar on December 11th. Have a great rest of your day, and bye for now.